Joining us now for the Debunk is Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left, available now everywhere you can find books. Professor Burgis, how are you?
I'm very good.
Thanks for returning. So you have given us a video, and I guess the debunk that you and Professor Wolff are going to do tonight is the calculation argument against socialism. Now, can you set up what is this video you sent? Like, who do you know who put it together?
I think that it's one of those, Hayek Institutes, Von Mises Institute, one of those kinds of organizations. I'm not 100% sure about this particular video, but I think this is something that comes out of one of the many institutes or organizations that libertarian rich people give to propagate the work of their classic theorists.
Okay, so all right, so this is coming from the Mises Institute. I'm actually very civil libertarian, but in my communist dystopia, if you were watching this, you'd automatically be put on some sort of list. And let's play this clip. Even the buffering of this video is boring.
Ludwig von Mises first articulated some of the main arguments against the possibility of socialism in 1920. He argued that the price system was essential for determining what to produce and how to produce it. It is because of prices set through trade in markets that producers know what the most efficient combination of inputs is, and prices adjusted through supply and demand tell consumers what is relatively abundant and what is relatively scarce. According to Mises, prices make rational economic decision-making possible. Thus, he wrote, quote, "Where there is no free market, there is no pricing mechanism. Without a pricing mechanism, there is no economic calculation." End quote. Moreover, prices change as some goods become relatively more or less scarce, and as technology or people's consumption preferences change. The price system makes it possible for producers and consumers to adjust their decisions and plans as economic circumstances change. Mises wrote that, quote, "In the socialist commonwealth, every economic change becomes an undertaking whose success can be neither appraised in advance nor later retrospectively determined. There is only groping in the dark. Socialism is the abolition of rational economy." End quote.
So first, Professor Burgis will go to you, and then, of course, Professor Wolff will land this home as well. But I just want to say at the outset, my response, not as a logic professor or economist, is this is great proof against the European accents make you sound smart argument. Go ahead.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, I will say that I don't think that this argument, like last week, a few days ago, we were talking about the argument for the non-aggression principle. I think that's just total nonsense. Once you kind of realize the trick at the heart of it, then it's just not compelling at all anymore. This is a little bit better because it does track, to a certain extent, some real problems in the Soviet model, at least of socialism, with lining up consumer preferences with production decisions. But as a matter of logic, what really hits me about this is if you take it the way that Hayek and Von Mises took it, and the way that these guys who made the video are taking it, as an argument against socialism. That's how it's usually presented. We have to have capitalism. We can't have socialism. Sorry, whatever the problems of capitalism are, we've got to keep the capitalist class, in charge forever, because otherwise we're going to run into this problem. It's committing the false dilemma fallacy. So the assumption is that either we have the exact form of socialism, the way of understanding socialism they had in the USSR, or we have capitalism, and those are the only options. And of course, those are not the only options. It's not Soviet socialism or no socialism. There are lots of things that smart socialists have said about how these decisions could be run in a post-capitalist economy. So the simplest and most obvious is that, what the kind of thing that like Bhaskar Sankara will talk about when he talks about socialism, where and a lot of people in the DSA will talk about, where you have certain key commanding heights are nationalized, And, you know, of course, we have abundant evidence from throughout the world, from lots of countries in the West, that there are things like healthcare that have been very nicely provided in a non-market way, right? So that we can have an economy where some elements are planned outside the market. That test has been done very successfully. And that, you know, if we do need a market sector, that those could be organized as workers' cooperatives instead of traditional hierarchical corporations. That's one way around this. Another way around this is Michael Albert and Robin Hanhel talk about participatory economics, Paracon, and Hanhel is the kind of economist who will give you efficiency equations for his proposed system. I don't want to spend a lot of time here taking about it because I'm really curious to get Professor Wolff's thoughts. But, you know, if you look that up, participatory economics, Paracon, that's another model. And I think a third model is the kind of thing that Professor Wolff talks about in his book, Democracy at Work, The Cure for Capitalism, which is that you could have these workers' self-directed enterprises that are maybe ambiguous between workers' cooperatives as we know them and having the public take a stake in them. But maybe that would be a good time for Professor Wolff to jump in.
All right, Dipset. Professor Wolff, please.
Okay, let me organize my thoughts about it around two things. If I heard correctly at the beginning, this was a report on something that came from von Mises in 1920. So let me be generous and assume that he was suffering from the fact that he was talking about what socialism could or couldn't achieve before it had had a chance to do so. Since the revolution was in 1917, it was immediately followed by a civil war, an invasion by other countries. It didn't really get out of a war condition until 1922. Lenin died in 1923, so it's really you have to wonder what he's talking about when he talks about socialism not working in 1920. I'm trying to be nice. I'm trying to be nice.
It's the post game. Please don't be nice, Professor
Okay.
Wolff.
Then we have countries that call themselves socialist, the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. Let's take them at their word for the moment. They are socialist. What did their non-rational groping in the dark, to quote him, what did it accomplish? In the case of the Soviet Union, it was the fastest economic growth in the history of the human race. Not bad for an economic system to go from being the poorest country in Europe, the old man of Europe, to becoming by 1975, despite 2 world wars fought on its territory, a civil war, a second civil war around the collectivization of agriculture, tremendous strains. By 1975, it's the number 2 economic power in the world after the United States. As economic growth goes, this is a pretty impressive record for socialism.
Particularly if you're in the dark.
Yeah. But there is one that did better, and that's called the People's Republic of China, which, by the way, is another one of these socialist experiments. It has now become the second power and arguably on its way to becoming the first power as the old first power sinks. And it also uses socialism to describe itself. So on empirical grounds, goodness. Now, I know that some of my colleagues react to this embarrassment, embarrassing Mr. von Mises and others like him, by announcing that the good results in China, and probably they would extend the argument to Russia, are in fact due to the extent of private enterprise and markets being allowed in, particularly to China in recent decades. But that's a game in which whatever is good is associated with whatever you like, and whatever is bad is associated with whatever you don't like. This is childish, and I'm not going to dignify it by a response. Whatever it is you think Russia and China are, economic growth they have excelled at. For the last 30 years, their economic growth has been faster every single year than that of the United States, despite every effort being made to deny or undercut that reality. Now to the logic of the question. This logic hangs on the following equation, which doesn't work. That scarcity The actuality of scarcity is measured by something's price. This is cuckoo. This makes no sense. But let me give you an example, because this is not a subtle argument. This is not a subtle argument, right? I'll give you a couple of examples. A safe way to produce massive amounts of electricity is in fact very scarce, because all of the ways we know how to do that are dangerous. They're either fossil fuels that are polluting our air, or they're nuclear energy, which we don't quite know how to control or keep safe.
Don't freak out, nuclear people.
Yes,
that's another group of people that needs to calm down.
There may be ways to change that, but for the moment,
see that?
There may be ways to change that. I'm not forever gloom and doom, but in fact, good energy is scarce. But we don't have people figuring out what the price of energy is, taking into account its real scarcity. Right. We instead measure how much we have to pay for it. And if you subsidize energy, as the world does, and if you make it, you don't care what the pollution is, and you don't care what the real costs all over the place are of getting these things, well, then you have a low price, and then everybody uses it. But that's not a sign of efficiency. And for me, in the age of some ecological and environmental awareness, where we know that if we teach in economics, it's efficient for a company to go into some factory business if they measure the costs of the fuel and the inputs and the labor, and they measure the price of the outputs, and the revenue is larger than the cost. Oh, goody, that's a profit. The prices work that way. It's efficient. We explain to students, if the smokestack of this factory emits terrible particles that cause the paint to chip and the tires to crack and people to get sick, then the cost, the efficiency for the economy has to count all of the costs that flow from this product. But we don't do that in capitalism. We only require the capitalist to count the costs he's responsible for paying. We don't require him to count the costs he is relieved of payment for. Consequently, when he does something responding to the price system, it is exactly groping in the dark, because the efficiency of it is unknown and may be very seriously negative. That is, the costs of the damaged health and the damaged environment may well exceed the profit margin of the product. So that if we actually cared about real scarcity and real efficiency, we wouldn't produce that product, because the costs exceed the revenue. But because capitalists, when they look at prices, only count those they have to pay, we get the result that isn't efficient, and we know it's not efficient, so that this is the purest form of ideological obfuscation. It reverses the real question, substitutes a question of prices, and then makes a flim-flam as if doing things around the price system ipso facto makes you efficient. It never did, and it doesn't now.
Now, what about the European voice point?
European voice point is very good.
Thank you.
The only problem with it is that I periodically resort to French and German, which were my first languages, and I inflect my English a little just to get a little more levitation.
Work that hustle. But it doesn't work on me, frankly. I don't know, no respect for Europeans here. None. You guys, that was great. Professor Burgis, get his book. Give them an argument, Logic for the Left.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, going to be, if you're listening to this in Los Angeles right now, then very shortly, I think in about 10 minutes, going to be on the David Feldman show.
Click.
Is going to be on 90.7 FM. And of course, you should finish listening to this show before you change.
Correct.
Obviously, right? But once the show is over, if that's still going on, I'm going to be on that. And that was a really fun discussion about Marx and socialism and Bernie Sanders and a lot of other things.
David Feldman is awesome, and I'm glad that this is your second appearance on that great show. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.